Medieval is a dark fantasy-themed boomer shooter that harkens back to ye old genre classics like Heretic and Hexen, though with a lot more fast-paced combat and less stumbling about in circles wondering where the hell you're supposed to go next. In this tale of battle and adventure, you journey throughout a series of mysterious and beautiful lands, and then kill everyone who lives in them. This game sees you take on the role of the champion, a four-eyed nerd who embarks on an odyssey to recover his stolen D20s, and get revenge on the legions of brutish normies who dare to advise that he get more than one hobby. While they were busy partying, though, you were busy studying the blade, and it is not the barbarians at the gates, but the unstoppable and primordial force of nerd rage. Beware though, brave adventurer, for in these lands that are oft not traveled, there hides fiendish spoilers that threaten to take you by surprise. If you plan to take these roads for yourself, I would advise you to hear my bard's tale at a later date. But if you've already made the pilgrimage, or simply do not care to, then sit down as I tell you the tale of how I played this game and stood. I lose substantially more respect for myself with each one of these dorky-ass intros. Anyway, I played a Medieval, and man, this game is badass. I'm really into this whole retro shooter revival that's been going on the past few years. It feels like it's the track that the genre was gearing up to go on before Halo and Call of Duty kind of fucked everything up. That's not really a knock against those games, by the way. I love both, but the impact they had on the industry led to some trends that I wasn't really a fan of. But about 10 years and one Doom reboot later, it seems like everyone has mostly given up on slow-paced, pseudo-realistic shooters that are more scripted than reality TV. Now we're back to fast-paced fuck-em-ups that put all the focus on bobbing and weaving your way through hordes of enemies in tightly designed levels and minimalistic narratives. Halo and Call of Duty still have their place in the industry, but it's nice to see that people have gone back to the drawing board for what makes an FPS an FPS. This more scaled-back design vision has also allowed much smaller dev teams to get in on the genre. Perfectly illustrating this point is Indefatigable, a name which is very easy to mispronounce in a very unfortunate way, who are the devs behind this game. They're a two-man team that's been working on a Medieval since 1997, when it started life as a Doom wad. Over the years, it gradually morphed into a standalone game and was finally released in 2019 to rave reviews. Because there's a lot to rave about here. The first and most apparent thing right off the bat is the game's visual style. Now, I'm not really a fantasy guy. I don't hate the genre. I actually think it can get pretty awesome. But my problem is that for the most part, fantasy is basically synonymous with high fantasy, which I think is boring as hell. I'm not about to start heaping shit on the Elder Scrolls, though. I don't hate it, it's just not my thing. A Medieval is the kind of fantasy that I like, though. In the intro, I called it dark fantasy, but weird fantasy is honestly probably a better term. We don't got elves or dwarves or any of that shit. Instead, we got ghost people who worship the moon and ethereal mages that use magic to create cyclopean outposts that float in the void between dimensions. In terms of environments, it trades in the standard quasi-medieval Europe setting for these strange celestial vistas that are equal parts gorgeous and alien. It's less the Lord of the Rings and more the dream quest of unknown Kadath, less a Song of Ice and Fire and more Weave World. Overall, I'm really into the whole cosmic fantasy thing this game has going on. Now for the shooting part of the game. First you've got the axe. It doesn't shoot, so I didn't use it, not much to say there. First real weapon we got is the Azure Orb. It shoots these blue homing, clouds at people. It's not the strongest weapon, but it is probably the most versatile. Third is the Whisper's Edge, basically this game's shotgun. It shoots these arc lasers that are really useful for hitting multiple enemies. Voltrite is a trident that shoots lightning bolts and can be used to make enemies explode and electrocute those near them. The Celestial Claw is a staff that shoots fucking planets. I'm guessing ones that are empty, because otherwise that would be... Well, who would want to live there anyway? Next is the Star of Torment. It's a mace that shoots crystal spikes which nails people to the wall, and is probably the best overall weapon in the game. Lastly, there's the Aeternum, a big cluster of party ribbons that shoots out this ball of death rays that obliterates everything near it, basically the BFG. One thing I've neglected to mention so far is that enemies in this game all drop souls, which you can pick up to fill a meter that when full lets you go sicko mode and makes all your weapons laughably overpowered. Just as a couple of examples, the Celestial Claw goes from firing planets to literal suns, and the Aeternum shoots out black holes because I guess the devs thought this game wasn't badass enough. So, we got an amazing art style, superb atmosphere, and creative and awesome weapons. But the real meat of any game is the levels. So how are they? Do you really not see a trend yet? They're great. The way the levels are organized, there's 7 realms, each with 4 levels, 3 normal and 1 boss fight. First realm is the Astral Equinox. God, that's such a cool last name. This is the one about the ghost people that worship the moon that I mentioned earlier. It's also probably the most normal set of levels in the game, which is saying something. Right from the start, you're immediately introduced to the game's unique visuals and soundscape, as well as its hyper-intricate level design. Seriously, with stages this complex, it's no wonder that the game took as long as it did to come out. Overall, it's a pretty strong start to the game. Next is the domain of the Sentinels, which is a kind of vaguely Roman temple that's been overtaken by some kind of parasite. From here on, the levels only get more mind-bogglingly ambitious. The third episode is the Pilgrim's Path, which is a kind of vaguely Aztec theme. I really like this one because it was satisfying to one-shot golems with the Celestial Claw. These two episodes are great, don't get me wrong, but the one I really want to talk about is the next one, the Arcane Expanse. Holy shit, this episode was incredible. Technically, it's supposed to be the 6th episode, but you can play them in any order, and I did this one fourth because fuck your rules. The celestial nature of the game's setting is on full display here as you traverse across this surreal dreamscape of non-Euclidean spaces and fight against beings made of magic and crystals. I can't get over how cool this shit is. It's so out there and bizarre. It's fantastical and adheres to pure dream logic. Visually, it's stunning, it's fun as hell to play through, and the music that plays in this section really helps you get lost in this strange world. After a really cool boss fight where you have to swim around a giant floating bubble and fight these two flying snakes is the next episode, The Forges. While the Arcane Expanse was essentially a highlight reel of the game's incredible visuals and featured more thinking out of the box style level design, here the map layouts go for a much more classical style. You make your way through super complex facilities with shortcuts that often loop back to earlier areas, and several sections that feature extensive platforming. It may lack the almost experimental approach that the last episode featured, but that's okay, because this is classic style stage crafting refined to a T. We're in the home stretch now with the penultimate episode, the Solar Solstice. It's also actually supposed to be the 4th one, but I once again say, fuck your rules. The visual style of this set of levels reminds me a lot of 80s and 90s fantasy book covers, or the kind of thing you'd see in artwork for early role-playing games. This is another one of the game's artistic highlights in my opinion. The whole time I was playing through this section, I couldn't help but wonder what was beyond those mountains in the distance, or think about what other civilizations could be found in the deserts of this world. This combined with the music, and of course the gameplay, it really gets the imagination going. I've talked a lot about how unique and interesting this game is, because I think that's one of the defining features of a medieval that really separates it from other games and makes it stand out amongst the pack. In the past 15 years, as graphical technology has advanced, there's been a huge push towards making games that are as visually realistic as possible. This has resulted in an effect where a lot of games end up looking very similar to one another, as the creation of unique or striking art styles has been overtaken by the pursuit of more and more realistic graphics. Don't get me wrong, I'm not saying advanced graphics are solely a bad thing, but the problem is that they should exist in complement to a game's art style, not in opposition to it. A good example of what I'm talking about is Marvel vs. Capcom. Everyone shat on Infinite when it was coming out, saying that a lot of the characters looked terrible, and fair enough, they did, especially in comparison to how good they looked in MVC3. But technically speaking, Infinite had much better graphics than MVC3. The problem wasn't visual fidelity, it was artistic implementation. If you take characters that have cartoony proportions and outlandish silhouettes, and then give them photorealistic skin textures and try to model their faces off real people, it just looks off. If developers focused more on art direction for visuals, and used all that processing power to support larger enemy counts, bigger and more intricate levels, or just anything really that affects the gameplay instead of horseball physics or whatever the hell they're doing now, games would probably be better off for it. Back to the actual subject of this video, we got one more episode left, The Void. I've talked a lot recently in some of my videos about how it's a somewhat common design pitfall of video games. The last few levels are significantly worse than the preceding ones. Stygian, The New Nightmare, System Shock 2, Bloodlines, these are all examples of great games that really shit the bed towards the end. Similar to those games, a Medieval's final set of stages have a drastic difference in quality from the rest. They're somehow even fucking better. The final episode of a Medieval consists of some of the most mind-blowing levels I have ever seen in a video game. The level of creativity displayed here is nothing short of genius, dumping the player into a strange world that exists beyond logic and forces the player to adapt on the fly as they move through a shifting series of seemingly sentient locales that are fighting against you as much as the enemies are. Navigation, exploration, and combat in these areas was so fucking fun, I was almost tempted to replay them right after I beat the game. The visuals and architecture blew my damn mind into the stratosphere. This shit is impossible to overhype. This is what I'm talking about. This is what I play video games for. To be taken to places that are completely unlike anything I've ever seen before and hopefully will ever see. There is so much raw vision here that it'll overload your eye sockets. I mean, there's a part where you have to get out of bounds to progress through the level. How fucking cool is that? After the final boss, which is literally evil itself, the game is over and you're treated to some cool key art and a final text screen. After that, there's a few little extra things. There's a level that was made as an RTX tech demo, which is surprisingly fun to play through, even if you're like me and you don't have an RTX card. There's also a horde mode that's pretty fun, but I didn't spend that much time with it. The game also comes with some free DLC called the Ancient Alphas. This is basically just a bunch of publicly downloadable alpha builds of the game, not really any new content, but I think it's really awesome nonetheless. You get to see how the game progressed from the earliest iterations with unfinished graphics and placeholders, all the way up to the next to final build. I love seeing the behind-the-scenes aspect of game development, so this is a real treat for me personally. So yeah, that's a Medieval. It's a hyper-fast-paced, ludicrously creative, gorgeous-looking boomer shooter that taps into not just all the things I love about shooters, but really video games in general. If you're a fan of classic FPS games, or just looking for something to wow the living shit out of you, then you owe it to yourself to play this game. I'm pretty excited for the expansion pack, and I can't wait to see what else Indefatigable does down the road. Hey guys, if you made it this far into the video, I just want to say thanks. It means a whole lot. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, all your standard YouTube outro stuff you always hear. And other than that, I will see y'all in the next video. Goodbye.